We will start with the first item, which is staffing at Fire Station 8. President Peduzzi, do you want to introduce this item before we get into the presentation?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. You may or may not know that City of West Palm, actually, let me start off here. I think we can all agree that one of the most important responsibilities that we have as elected officials is ensuring the health, safety, and welfare of our residents. That must include all of our residents, both near and far. As most of my colleagues here on this dais know, Station 8 covers an area that is in a fairly remote location from the rest of the city. With that, it has some unique challenges. This, coupled with the fact that the station is not fully staffed makes the situation even more precarious. You may or may not know that the City of West Palm Beach does not have enough staffing at Station 8 to even handle some of the simplest of calls by itself without calling in help from the county or the City of Palm Beach Gardens. The City of West Palm Beach cannot handle a car accident with injuries on North Lake Boulevard ever without having assistance from those other agencies. That's because our station out there is an either-or station. We can either send an engine or a rescue, but not both. A simple car accident with any report of injuries requires an engine and a rescue. As such, the City of West Palm Beach, the capital city, the leader in every other area, can't handle a car accident without assistance of another agency. That's just one example that minimal staffing or an either-or station presents. There's also been some talk that the county has enacted a level of service that pretty much gets rid of either-or stations. Although we may not be under that ordinance, because it is a county ordinance, and I believe would apply to those unincorporated areas, it's still a level of service that we should probably strive to have, for our city as well. So that's, Mayor, really the crux of it. And I'm not sure if there'll be enough time also. The next closest station to Station 8 is Station 9. Station 9 is also a minimally staffed station. I think there's 3 firefighters at Station 9, and they're operating out of a temporary structure. So that's something that should need to be addressed at some point too. But I appreciate the opportunity to start this dialogue and make sure that all of our residents can feel safe in all of our communities.
Thank you. Chief Matty, looks like you have a presentation teed up.
Yes, sir. Good morning. Diana Matty, Fire Chief. Good morning, Mayor, Commissioners, and staff. And I have a Fire Station 8 presentation here for you as requested. So I'm going to go into a little bit of the background of Fire Station 8. It was first put into service in 2006. The crews ran out of a construction trailer that was split in half. Half was for the contractors, and half was for the firefighters. They hung out in the back of the trailer for 12 hours a day. It was an ALS engine, staffed with overtime, and did not include additional FTEs at that point. So that went on for a couple years. That was over off of Sand Hill Way in Ibis, actually in the development. Further down the line in 2008, we moved to the trailer that you see on the left side. It was a temporary facility with an awning, so the apparatus are at least shaded. And then at that point, when we went from the construction trailer to this trailer, we did what's the either or, so 2 units out of that station, and we did have permanent FTEs for those positions. And then we had the grand opening of the brick and mortar building in 2019. This is the current zone map for Fire Station 8. You can see it runs slightly north of North Lake, along the B line, and then down south into the southern border being Grassy Waters, and a little bit west into the acreage. So adaptive response, as the commissioner talked about, we have 2 apparatus there. So those are not necessarily the exact apparatus that are there, but the one on the right is what's called a rescue, and that's what transports people to the hospital. And the one on the left is a pumper, also called a fire engine, and then that's what goes first out on fires, vehicle accidents, things like that. And there are 3 firefighters at that station, and depending on what the primary need for that emergency is, they take either or vehicle. So this is a snapshot of the Station 8 calls by month from January of 2020 to June of 21. So the last 18 months, you can see how many calls are run by that fire station per month. With March of 20, we had a peak, which is likely related to COVID, because that was when things first started increasing for us down here. So just over time, you can see it kind of ebbs and flows, and there's a little bit of seasonality to it. In the winter months, January, February, we start to see a little bit more, and then again, October-ish, September, when it's more pleasant to be here, I suppose. But that's what that looks like. And then this is Station 8 calls for service are in blue, but as compared to Fire Station 9 in red, and then Fire Station 7, which is out off of Okeechobee Boulevard near Bay Winds and some of those other developments right out there past the Publix. So you can see an increase in the trend line for Station 7 and 8, Station 7 and Station 9. Station 8's kind of remaining around that same, within 30 calls of 600 for the last several years. So probably double what it was when it first opened, more than double what it was when it first opened. So it's just, it's over time. And these are the time averages for the last 6 months. I went in and pulled the most recent 6 months. So response time is broken up into several categories when we talk about an overall response time. So there's the time that the dispatchers have to handle the call, meaning take the 911 call, type it in, dispatch it out. There's turnout time, which is the time when the speakers open, the firefighters receive notification, put on their gear, equipment, whatever's needed, and the truck starts moving. And then the travel time is actually the time that the wheels are turning from the front of the fire station to the location of the emergency. So you can see the comparison in Station 8 versus the citywide average. So in town, our travel time is, significantly less, just due to distance. This is what's called a heat map, and this is a snapshot of August of 2020 to July of 21, so a full calendar year of the house fires, brush fires, et cetera, where the fire truck was needed on those calls. And that's in Station 8's response zone. And then medical calls, the same time period for a 1 year, calendar year, with just the medical calls that occurred in that zone. So I can take questions.
Okay. President Peduzzi.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Chief, for the presentation. I certainly can see when you look at call volume that the call volume in Station 8's area is significantly less than the call volume of some of the surrounding areas and some of the other zones in West Palm Beach. But is that the only thing that we should be looking at, is the call volume when determining proper coverage for a zone? Because even though there may not be a volume of calls, when a serious or significant call comes in, don't you want to make sure that there's adequate staffing at the time to make sure that we can handle anything that happens anywhere in the city?
Absolutely, and with that, we have mutual aid agreements. So you can see in this slide here, number 9, down there in the lower left-hand corner, you have Palm Beach County Fire Station 26. And then further east, which is off the map, is one of the garden stations. So whenever we have something that is more complex than what that first unit can handle, we receive mutual aid from them. Going back to the history of this, when we went from not having anything out there to having a part-time truck to, getting a permanent fixed facility where we could, take showers and cook meals and things like that. In the trailer that you see here on the left, to now having a building. So we've come, I feel like we've come a long way since its inception, now having permanent staff. But, in the future, that is, mentioned in our strategic plan as, something we have to address as those neighborhoods out there. For example, we never even used to have a station at Station 9. And we looked at what are the response times to that area. And the reason we opened a fire station in the strip mall next to a pizza shop and a Dunkin' Donuts was because we needed to put a footprint out there. We needed to have, and within a day of putting that rescue truck out there in Station 9 zone, those citizens got at least 2 minutes better response time per call. So yes, response time is one thing. The number of times that somebody else has to run your call is another factor. Volume is another factor. Obviously, it goes without saying, budget is another factor. So the distance that we would need to travel to the calls. There's a number of factors that we look at when making that case. And that's just what happened with Fire Station 9, who's now in another. It's actually very similar to this trailer, but it was the trailer that we used for Station 4 when we did the construction. It got moved out there off of Haverhill and Roebuck, and so now they're in that temporary facility.
Chief, a couple of questions. One is, do you have any data on how often we have had to request service under the mutual aid agreements that we have?
It's about 10%.
So only 10%.
It fluctuates. The reason we got the additional unit at fire station number 7, remember, it used to just be just like this. It was an either or. Adaptive response, they picked which unit they went on. When we looked at the percentage of calls that somebody else had to handle, Station 7 was creeping up into the 14, 19%, so let's call it 20 for talking purposes. 20% of the time, Station 7 wasn't running the calls for City of West Palm people. It was Palm Beach County. So now, the issue with Station 8's percentages is there's not enough calls to really get an accurate piece of data. I have to look at years, not months, when it comes to because of the volume. But when they're not there, right, either Gardens or Palm Beach County has to run the call, meaning they're not there because they're on another call, the truck is broken, or just needs regular maintenance, whatever the case is, they're coming back from another call sometimes, and maybe Palm Beach County goes out first, and then they're the second due on that incident. So that hovers around, it's been as high as 11.4% and as low as 8%.
And then I guess my next question is, do you have metrics, data, protocol that tells you when you should move a statement from either or the adaptive use to a more fully staffed station?
That's based on a number of factors, and that's how we did it with Station 7, and that availability of that first due unit to cover that zone. And now that Station 7 has 2 units, it's only about 3 to 4% of the time that a West Palm Beach unit is not providing services to West Palm Beach.
So what are the factors that would contribute to that decision for Station 8, say?
So call volume is one. The travel time that we see on the call, it's 2 minutes about longer than it is in a citywide average. There's availability of funds. There's availability of the apparatus. We would obviously need to hire more people. So there's quite a number of factors that we have to plan out. If that, and just population. Over time, with all of the new development, when IBIS first opened, and there was, I don't know what the number of residents was, but there's a lot more homes in IBIS now than there was in IBIS when we were living in the construction trailer. So just with population density, call volume goes up naturally because you have more car accidents, you have more people in the area demanding services.
Well, let me ask a question. Do you think now is the time to move from an adaptive use to a more fully staffed Station to Station 8, based upon all the data that you look at?
I think it can be an incremental thing, similar to what we did with the construction trailer, part-time. You know, we have to look at Fire Station 9 as well. You know, the question was asked, it's a similar situation. When you look at the call volume there, we went from running 0 calls in that zone as a primary to, because other units were coming in. Since we've made it its own zone, those calls keep going up. Now, the calls in the other zones haven't gone down. So what we could theoretically do, if the funding existed, was we could start partially staffing that extra and looking at what days are the peak times, what would be best based on the numbers of the time of day and the day of the week. You know, if Sunday there's generally not many calls, but Wednesdays is a peak for us, then we could try, you know, another thing that we can do that's not, you know, it's kind of steps towards that direction, is there's a lieutenant in charge of that station. A step that's, you know, possible for that is to make that a captain station. So if we do it incrementally over time, that way it's not so much of a dramatic impact to the budget, we can get there.
Commissioner Lambert.
Thank you for the presentation, Chief. You mentioned that this is in the strategic plan for the fire department to add more staffing. Can you talk a little bit about that plan, or is there any background related to that in the strategic plan?
Sure. In 2008, we sat down and had a mixed working group of firefighters from all ranks and some admin, and created a strategic plan just specifically for where our staffing needs were, and some culture issues that we needed to deal with, some training issues that we needed to deal with. More of a strategic plan, just to kind of draw the line in the sand and see where we were, to get a baseline. So we're 3 years into that, and we've managed to accomplish through budget several of those positions that were greatly needed over the last several years. Building superintendent, we're getting a fiscal services supervisor, or excuse me, a senior fiscal analyst in this budget. We got an additional administrative assistant 2 years ago. So, you know, we've made leaps and bounds with where we were. One of the things the fire department has traditionally done over time is we put emergency services on the road, and we haven't kept up with the skeleton, the backbone that pays the bills and makes sure that people get paid, and you know, all of those office type positions. So we've managed to shore some of that up over the past years. As our city grows in that direction, you know, we created Station 9, and we've got this fire station going. We still need a training facility. So all of those things are lined up in the strategic plan to include future organizational charts on what other positions that we need to keep up with.
Commissioner Warren.
Hi, Chief. Do you mind going back to the slide that shows the number of calls for the stations?
This one or this one?
That one.
Okay.
Thank you.
Now, these are, just keep in mind, these are west.
Okay, the west, that
Yes,
was
ma'am.
part of what I was wondering. So these are Western Community Stations.
Correct. So Station 7, the green is Okeechobee Boulevard. Station 9, the red is Haverhill and Roebuck. And then Station 8 is North Lake, Ibis area out west.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
I know in a lot of emergency situations or facilities that provide emergency services, they have per diem staff or staff that complement the regularly scheduled employees. Do we have anything like that in place? Do we have any type of firefighters that we can use during peak seasons, that we can use during peak times, that could go from different places that wouldn't necessarily be at one particular station, but could go where we as a city need them most?
We would just hire overtime, kind of like we do with special event staffing. If we have Sunfest, we'll hire people that are off duty to come work the detail in that.
Okay, because per diem employees would not require benefits, and it wouldn't be the same cost as overtime.
And our overtime is not pensionable, so we don't, it's not an impact in that way. It's just they get time and a half of their hourly rate, and it's not a pensionable benefit.
Okay.
Commissioner Shove.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Chief, for the presentation. About 2 weeks ago, I was driving home, and at 25th and Broadway, as I was crossing through, a woman stopped in the middle of Broadway, and I didn't realize what had happened until I pulled through, and I saw there was a man on the bike on the ground. And I got out of the truck and went over, and no one was calling 911. So I get on the phone with 911, and it was probably about a 2-minute response. And as there was an argument going on between the man on the bike on the ground and the woman driver, it was probably the longest 2 minutes of my life. And so when you're in an emergency like that, and thank goodness in that case, no one was critically injured, we're looking at response times, and those 2 minutes can be really stressful for the person that's involved. And so I understand that your job is not easy, trying to allocate staff, and looking at the call volume that comes out of the Station 8 call center. I can't help but think about the fact that still the 606 calls are still some of the longest calls of people's lives calling in for emergencies. And that extra time is really meaningful to our residents. So as we're looking at what staffing could be in the area, we just hired 30 plus firefighters. Are there any availability to have that kind of flexible staffing as you have recommended to say when are the highest call volumes coming in, and making sure that we have firefighters there to address calls?
Sure. I can assure you that what's happening east of Military, those units are running probably 4 times what is going on out there. So, our peak time in town is typically, during the business week and on weekend nights. So when would we be able to free those people up? I mean, it's a delicate balance between using mutual aid and keeping services in town where there's a lot of activity. So those 30 firefighters didn't even fill all of the openings that we have. Unfortunately, we had to, we lost some in the process, and we're down to 8 in our new process, and we have 17 vacancies. So we're still not even fully staffed to where we need to be to meet just the days off that are, contractually required for our staff, for our firefighters. And, we don't have extra bodies. Every day we're hiring overtime, and our overtime budget is fragile this coming year. So we're going to be looking at where can we change what we do on a daily basis with the rest of the city. So if I'm going to be left with a fragile overtime budget for this coming year, I need to know, what are our priorities? If I don't have enough to hire overtime to staff what's required now, what am I going to do? That comes with service changes elsewhere in the city. So unfortunately, it all boils down to the budget.
So understanding that there are limited resources and unlimited need, I know you've talked a number of times about the community medic program, and I was just curious if something like that, looking at how we address our calls in the east of Military neighborhood, so that may potentially free up resources to address the western neighborhoods, or having a community medic type program here where at least there is a response. Again, that time of just waiting, you've called 911, you're in an emergency, and you just need someone to be there. If we can shorten that time period, is the community medic program something that would be applicable either here or would help, if applied in the eastern communities, to free up resources?
Theoretically, yes. We've gotten to where we were able to get some vehicles. The most expensive part, the infrastructure is there now. We've got the vehicles, we've got the defibrillators, which are about $40,000 a piece. So we've got 2 of those. We've got the equipment necessary. We were getting ready to use those in the COVID response, and then kind of early in the summer we shut down the testing site and we shut down the vaccine site, and everything was kind of status quo for a while, and now we're on the peak with Delta. So our call volume is back up. The firefighters are, having wait times at the hospitals. So it's just occupying a lot more of our time again. So the community medic was kind of another part of hiring all those firefighters, was hopefully on some, if we were shored up on staffing, maybe we could reallocate some of those people. We just don't have them yet. Unfortunately, we're still understaffed. We're trying. We haven't, should have 8 firefighters starting next month, and then we're going to be opening up for applications for hiring again in September. So we're doing everything we can to put bodies on, but we've got to have people in place. Theoretically, yes, we could get those community medics to handle some of what they call low acuity calls, so they're not crisis right now. There's something that people need some referral for, maybe work within the community to get them services, to reduce those high utilizers' dependence on 911.
So essentially, that would free up if we got staffing and equipment, so it still comes down to a staffing issue.
Yes.
So that way would free up kind of the larger response needed. Understood. Thank you.
Potentially, yes.
Commissioner Fox?
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I had a question, if you could just kind of clarify how this partnership works, I guess, with Palm Beach County and Palm Beach Gardens. I mean, for example, if the rescue was out on a medical call and a fire call came in, then are they just on standby to get those calls? Does that impact the response time? I mean, I would imagine it does. I wasn't sure if it was included in the response time you gave us an average, or if it's more than that. I mean, obviously, you never know when the call is going to come in, so it makes it, you want to have the people ready all the time, and having only one truck available is really limiting. So I'm just curious if you can talk a little bit about, I guess, how this backup plan works and how those calls are transferred to the other.
Sure, I'd be happy to. So we have what's called a countywide mutual aid agreement, which we are all signed on to, and that just means that neighboring fire departments will help one another out in the event that they need it. We can request assistance. So, for example, if Riviera Beach has a large fire, they can request mutual aid from us, and we'll send, a couple units up there. Same with the town of Palm Beach. We'll go over the bridge and help them when they need it. So, because we're on a regional dispatch system with Palm Beach County, it's they don't have to call the chief and say, "Hey, can you help us?" So that reduces that time. So it's automatic that the next closest unit or the next closest station, and they can look at it on GPS monitoring of where the fire trucks are and say, "Hey, we've got something down the road, can you grab this?" So if you look on the lower left, that's a county fire station. So if 8 is out, there's one there, there's another county fire station east of here on the B line, and then there's one in Palm Beach Gardens a little bit further east. So one or the other of those stations would be dispatched out to go cover that call. So for example, Fire Station 7 is out off of Okeechobee Boulevard and just west of Jog. So there's a county fire station just east of the turnpike, so they would be the next ones that would go in there. So Fire Station 23 from the county would run over to our Station 7 call. So that's how the mutual aid coverage works.
Okay, we'll start back around. President Peduzzi.
Thank you, Mayor. If you can go back to slide 8. So we see a total response time for Station 8 and then citywide. I assume in that citywide number of 6 minutes and 40 seconds includes the Station 8 response time.
Yes, sir.
So if you took out the Station 8 response time, the rest of the city actually probably have a lower response time if you took out Station 8 by whatever number of seconds.
Yes.
Probably not minutes, but probably seconds.
Probably close to 6:20, 6:10.
Okay. So there would even be a greater disparity between the citywide response and the Station 8 response because of the fact that Station 8 is included in that citywide.
Yes.
And then the other issue, the mayor asked about the percentage of time a percentage of times where another agency has to come into Station 8's zone. And you had suggested it was 10%. To clarify that, that's probably because of the fact that most calls are rescue calls involving a medical call. I would say probably 80% of the calls we get are probably medical, right? Somewhere in
If you
there?
look at the difference between these two slides in our
Yeah.
heat map,
80%, 90% maybe.
out there, it's probably closer to, I don't have the exact number, but it's significantly higher
Right.
medical.
So it's understandable that we have a rescue out there, that we can handle the rescue calls. We're handling the rescue calls, you know. But if you look at the other 10% of the calls that are the calls that might be fires or car accidents, 100% of the time we're having to have some other agency come in. So if it's not a medical call, 100% of the time we have to have assistance. Would that be accurate?
For fire calls, 100% of the time.
We can handle the rescue calls most of the time unless they come back to back.
Correct. Yeah, that was what I was going to say, was unless then a second call comes in, or if it's a complicated call, like an overdose with cardiac arrest or something,
Right.
something along those lines that requires an EMS captain and another crew to assist. So the majority of the calls, one truck can handle,
Right.
but then on these calls, there's always going to be a need for assistance.
Right.
Whether
So
it's-
I'm sorry, Chief.
Whether it's a fire, whether it's a vehicle accident, because a vehicle accident, you go out the door with at least a rescue and a fire engine. Sometimes more is needed, sometimes you need special operations if it's an extended incident, something of that nature. On a fire, in town, in the eastern communities, we typically handle our fires with just city units unless our ladder truck is occupied on another call. But the further, we get mutual aid, the further away from the city proper that you get, because there are less units to cover out there. So we might get, a Gardens engine, a Palm Beach County engine, a West Palm engine, an assortment of units for a fire that's out in that region.
Right. So to sum it up, we can handle most medical calls ourselves. If a medical call involves a cardiac arrest or anything significant, a serious traumatic injury, we have to have help. We can't handle a cardiac arrest ourselves in Zone 8 ever.
Yes. Excuse me. Yes.
We require assistance.
It requires assistance just because of the nature of the extent of the care that person needs requires more than 3 people can handle.
Right. And that's just what I'm suggesting, is that you can't just look at call volume. If you want to make sure you have proper staffing and coverage, you should be able to cover a car accident or a cardiac arrest within your zone by yourself, but with the either-or system, you can't. And that's my argument against the either-or system, that we always have to have assistance for any significant medical call or anything other than a medical call. So, that's all I have for now. Thank you.
Commissioner Lambert?
Thank you. Chief, I was curious, you mentioned that we had 17 open positions right now, is that
Yes.
right? And we're looking at, hopefully, 8 more will be graduating soon, and we'll be filling some of those vacancies. Is there a gold standard for the amount of open positions? I mean, obviously, we want to be 100% fully staffed, but, understanding that people retire and that there's always some, hiring and people leaving.
The fire department does not typically carry vacancies like some other departments in the city do. We're typically, our vacancies are typically filled unless throughout the year we have a retirement or, something of that nature. We received that grant that, between the grant and putting Engine 1 back in service, we had 41 vacancies at one point, and that for us is unheard of. We might hover around 2 to 3, and we'll hire when we get about 5 vacancies, but by and large, this is kind of an unheard of situation that we're in. The market is great for firefighters out there to get jobs right now. There's a lot of departments that are expanding, so there's a lot of need for firefighters right now with COVID and the call volumes that are going on across the state. So we're doing everything we can. We have a hiring team. We have an HR rep that works almost full-time with us. And, we're doing everything we can to put those people on the crew, and it's just time.
Thank you. And also a follow-up to Commissioner Peduzzi's question about the response time. Is there a national gold standard for response time?
There is the National Fire Protection Administration, 1710 is the chapter, and there are time and assembly standards that are in there. And, it says that, for example, our total call time to assemble at a fire for the first due unit is 480 seconds. And then there's other standards, other time benchmarks within that. So one of the things that you see here, it's a 60-second turnout per NFPA. It's a 60-second turnout time for EMS calls where you're not putting on any additional gear. It's 80 seconds for fire call where you have to put on the bunker, take these shoes off, put the bunker pants on, put the coat on, and get on the call. So by and large, we do well with that. As far as the turnout time, you can see there is some lag out at Station 8, which, we have the information. We're gonna dig a little bit further into that because we have to look at, because the call volume is what it is, we have to see what's causing that. Is it because they're already on the road, or is, why that time difference is. But travel time, when you build a fire station, the original planned location for the fire station out there was within the community, and it's outside on North Lake, but this gives them broader access to the corridor for the car accidents. So that was before my time as far as being in this seat to where that fire station location was ultimately built. But the travel time can, the fire stations are supposed to be within a 2-mile radius, but when you move out to kind of an unincorporated area as that was initially, and where our fire station was, and now it's been annexed by Palm Beach Gardens. So, the zones kind of grow based on what are the neighboring departments doing and where is the population. Our zone goes really far east, but a lot of it is just, the real only hazard is North Lake Boulevard. There's nothing's happening very much in grassy waters, right? Fortunately. Because it's, you're not allowed to go out in the preserve alone. So it keeps, occasionally we get calls into the other areas for hikers or things like that. But, the total response time, if something is on fire, if it's a fire call, is 480 seconds, where the first due unit has to get there. So we do lag in that area.
Thank you.
Chief, is there anything inherently bad about taking advantage of mutual aid agreements? Does that mean that we are deficient as a department because we call upon other departments to help us from time to time?
Bad is not the word I would use. It's just, that's why they exist. The mutual aid agreements exist for that purpose, because not everybody can have, full staffing at each fire station. I think it's wholly different when you don't have a fire station there at all versus, having one that is there most of the time. Is my feeling that someday we're going to need to get to that point? Absolutely. The same with Fire Station 9. But, when I'm looking at what I have to do within the department right now with what I have to do what's in the interest of the big picture. And the calls for service, we're busy as a system, and they're just going up, and we have to do what we can to plan for the future to keep up with this. And I'm in a difficult position with this in particular, because it is so far away from the rest of the city services. But at the same time, when they're not there, that 10% of the time, somebody else is having to cover those calls.
And one other question, and I forget what slide it was, where you talked about the number of calls for service compared to 7 and 9. Yeah, that one. Of that number, do you have any idea what percentage are fire-related?
I couldn't find out. I don't have it broken down in this, but citywide, we're about 75% medical and 25% fire-related.
And I'm talking about out west, though.
More medical.
Station 8,
More medical.
more medical.
These are, yeah, really the comparison is here on the heat map. The blues are medicals, these are fire-related.
So in that same period, we had what, 9, 10 fire-related? We comparing apples to apples? August
Yeah,
20,
nine-
August
nine-
of 20 to July 21, and then go to the slide 10, yeah. Okay,
For one calendar year.
okay. All right, Commissioner Schoaf, I think, is next.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess as I sit in and listen, the main theme is that there's never enough resources. And Chief Matty, I think you have a very difficult job. It sounds like we are headed in the direction to hire more firefighters, so to get more resources. So that issue is being taken care of. And then there is the issue of staffing at this particular station, which Chief Matty has offered some suggestions and ways to resolve that. So I guess my question would be more of an administrative question, Mayor and City Administrator, is how do we start to implement some of those suggestions of taking a look at the highest call volume times and putting extra staffing there at those times and starting that hybrid model? Is that something that we can look at from a staff perspective per the chief's request or suggestion?
Well, we'll wait to hear what the request or recommendation is from the chief. I mean, I think we take that into account whenever we go through budgeting period. Ms. Johnson, you could correct me if I'm wrong, but the chief's input as to her, we solicit the chief's input when we're putting together the budget.
So just so that I understand.
Let me have Ms. Johnson respond to that, please.
That is correct. Now, as part of the budget process for FY22, we did not get to this level of discussion in terms of future need. We were looking at what is needed for FY22 and what can be funded within the confines of the budget. Chief and I have had a subsequent discussion, subsequent meaning to the development of the balanced budget for FY22, to start talking about future needs based on the board's discussion about the strategic plan in the fall, and then how those future needs can be taken into consideration.
So if I understand, FY22 is set without recommendations of having additional staffing, but there are ongoing discussions to determine the strategy going forward of potentially funding things like flexible staffing, of looking at the highest call times, et cetera. So FY22, what we've been presented in the budget does not include those recommendations, but those recommendations are being reviewed for potential budget allocations as we look at FY22 going forward.
Correct. On your latter statement, those discussions are being viewed in the context of bringing it into the strategic planning discussion for the fall. And then that's going to then shape the budget for FY23 and moving forward.
Okay. Just so that I can clarify about the direction that we're headed forward, is that to say then our position is that any of these recommendations would not be addressed until FY23, or is there potential for them to be addressed in FY22? Not in the budget, but in subsequent discussions to the budget, or it has to wait until FY23?
I can't say whether or not it has to wait until FY23 from this perspective. When the board gets into the strategic planning discussion that is contemplated for the fall, and based on what direction comes out of that, the board has, a couple of options Based on fund balance, if the board determines this is a critical need, that we need to be looking at fund balance to fund this, and then there's support from the board, because if you look at fund balance, you have a requirement that when you use it for operations, you have to have a plan on how you're going to replace that. So those will be part of the discussions, and then we'll look at the options that are available to the board related to funding, and then get what policy direction will come out of that. So I can't say that your only option would be it has to wait to FY23. I would tell you that whatever options you look at, we need to know how that funding would be impacted in the conditions and requirements that come with it.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Fox.
Thank you. Just to that point, I wondered if Chief Matty would be able to give us a budget for the part-time flexible staffing, just so that we have an idea when we're looking at these options in the fund balance. That
Sure,
we'll
I can
know
work
what
on
you're
that,
looking for.
absolutely.
Thank you.
Would you like it also to include Station 9? Essentially, this is what's left hanging out there. Station 8 is an adaptive response unit, either or. Station 9 is a rescue truck that runs out of a trailer. By and large, the rest of the city, response-wise, we have at least 2 units at all the other stations. You know, I can do it for both. I can do it including the community paramedic. I can do it with kind of like what Commissioner Warren suggested, just kind of not necessarily a reserve cadre, but with just overtime. You know, I can formulate it any way the board would like.
Well, let me ask, as part of the discussion, and we just began those discussions, so I want the commissioners to be clear about that. We've just come through presenting the preliminary balanced budget. Chief and I have began to have the discussion about future needs. I don't want the board to be under the false impression that we have had full-blown discussions, because we're still in the process of preparing for the first and second budget adoption hearings. So that has been my focus. Understanding the concern and comments that came out of the discussions about the strategic plan, particularly they were in the context of the discussion on the fire assessment fee. That's why Chief and I started having those discussions. I would think, and this would be my suggestion, when you look at the different options that you just articulated, whether it is for Fire Station 9, Fire Station 8, the flexible funding, that all of those would be wrapped into strategic plans, so we're not just dealing with piecemeal options, that we look at all of those and bring those into strategic planning. The board will have that full picture, the various projected cost estimates. We will be looking at what the projected revenue increases are for fire assessment, for the general fund, for fund balance, and then the board can make an informed decision on how much of this that we want to bite out within the confines of the fiscal constraints that we have to operate under.
Did that answer your question, Commissioner Fox?
Yes, thank you. I just, if we're going to start looking at it and looking at the fund balance, I just want to understand what the needs are so that we can start planning.
I'll be prepared for the strategic planning session with multiple options.
All right, Commissioner Warren.
Chief Matty, that's a huge responsibility to look at the entire city and be able to make decisions and recommendations on where you see the greatest needs, and really focusing on that. And I heard you say a lot of things, so I would like to make sure that I understand.
Yes, ma'am.
You've spoken about staffing deficiencies that exist for the entire city. So given the opportunity to bring in more firefighters, where would you ideally be able to put those people first?
The very first place they go is where the overtime person is today, because we are the level that we are at right now is because we're hiring overtime for those positions. We have numerous firefighters out on COVID right now. Any kind of extended injuries, we have several firefighters that are out on extended medical. When they give birth to a child or adopt a child, they get time off. So there's a lot of factors in why firefighters aren't at work. Vacation time or whatever the contractual agreements provide for. The very first place those are going to go is to remove those overtime spots from the roster. So they will come in so that we don't have to hire someone off duty to fill that. So that we're hoping to be at our baseline by January. So in January, when we should have all of our seats filled, possibly February, then we can evaluate, well, how much overtime money do we have left? How many people a day are we hiring? And how many can I assign out to other projects? For example, community medic, for example, part-time staffing at Station 8, or wherever that need is. We just have to get to that level of staffing that gives me the ability to put those people on the truck with our fragile overtime budget as it is.
If I could, Mayor, let me just underscore here, because I think it's important that the board has a clear understanding when we talk about the impact of overtime. So if I take the FY21 budget, fire's overtime budget was $2.7 million. It becomes a major fiscal impact when, because of the various things that you have to navigate with firefighters being on vacation or out for paternity or maternity leave or whatever the reason may be. If you take that $2.7 million that is in the overtime budget, the use of that is not per se the problem. The problem comes in when you use all of that $2.7 million, which is the case as we speak, and then have to fund those off times with overtime, and it exceeds that $2.7 million. That's the situation that we have with fire and police. Fire's overtime budget is 2.7, and I know this discussion is not related to police, but the impact is the same. Police's overtime budget is 2.2 million. The reason you have the overtime budget in there is because you have the staffing challenges that have to be balanced. It becomes a major fiscal impact when they exceed the overtime budget, and that's what we have. If the board goes back to, and I know we've had several work sessions and discussions, and a lot of the nuances tend to get lost in translation, but fire's overtime budget was significantly impacted because of COVID-19. Police's overtime budget was significantly impacted this year, or last year primarily, because of the number of protests. Those were the drivers. So when they exceed what is budgeted for overtime, that's the major fiscal impact that we have. Now, what we try to do as a first step is that where the other general fund departments underspend their budgets, we absorb the excess costs over the overtime budget from those. So that's the first place that I'm going to look for, as opposed to coming to the board saying we need to take money out of fund balance. Now, theoretically, if the overtime excess cannot be absorbed from cost savings from the other general fund line item accounts, then we're in the position where we're looking at fund balance. So I just want the board to be clear on that. And when you look at fund balance, if we have discretionary unassigned fund balance, that's the first place we look. There's no requirement under the city code that we have to have a financial plan on how you replace that. But once you utilize all of the discretionary unassigned fund balance, if you hit that 3% fund balance that's required by code, or if you go into that third level of fund balance, the 10% for emergency reserves, that's when the board has to have a financially feasible plan on how you would replace it.
Okay, President Peduzzi.
Thank you, Mayor. If we could go back to slide 8, I needed a clarification from you.
Yes, sir.
It says Station 8 and then citywide. Station 8, does that mean the whole Zone 8? Meaning, or is that just the response times for the city units, or is it all units?
Those are response times for the city units running out of that fire station,
Well,
covering
then,
that zone.
What about when we have Gardens or the county come in? Those could be considerably longer response times then.
Yes. I would have to pull the numbers from fire dispatch to get those, but that is for our units running in that zone.
So that's even more troubling to me, that we've got an 8-minute, 26-second response time just for Station 8 units, when at least 10% or 10% of the time, I mean, I just, it's hard for me to understand the 10% of the time because I see Gardens and County in that area so often, but maybe it's just at those car accident calls and the ones that are more visible. But that's really concerning to me, because that 8 minutes could, it's probably higher than that if you average in the response times from Station 26 or Garden Station. The response times could even be 9 minutes or 10 minutes if you average in those
I can
others.
revisit that with county dispatch to get that information for you.
Okay, and then as a follow-up, are there any other areas of our city where we have such a lengthy response time of 8 minutes, 26 seconds, and that's giving us the benefit of the doubt that it really is 8 minutes, 26 seconds? So, are there any other areas of the city where the response times are that lengthy?
There could be a number of factors where on a given day it is that way, but in general, the answer is no. For example, if Fire Station 2 is out and they're working with Station 4 on the interstate and there's traffic and rain, it could be a while before Fire Station 1 then gets all the way down to Arlington Road.
We're talking about averages here.
Averages. There on a regular occasion, no.
Okay, so that Zone 8 has the longest response times in the city, and I would think that the people of Ibis Reserve, Ibis, North Lake Boulevard if you get into an accident, Grassy Waters if you have a medical, deserve, to have a quick response time just like everyone else in the city. I mean, those minutes seem like hours when you're waiting, so it's significant that there's a couple-minute additional response time, maybe even more if we factor in those other agencies coming in, which I thought that covered Zone 8, but when I saw Station 8, that's when it just came to me that it's probably longer than 8 minutes and 26 seconds. I would assume that it's the gold standard to have an engine and a rescue that are fully manned at each station. Would that be correct?
Utopia, absolutely.
So the 2 stations in my zone, I have 3 city stations in my district. Stations 8 and 9 fall somewhere short of the gold standard.
Correct. We as this city has grown from when I started in 1994, we had 6 fire stations and 4 rescue trucks. Over this time period, we have grown to where we are now, and is that mapped out in the future growth in our fire department? I do believe it is. So I guess I have a little bit of a different perspective on it in seeing how far we have come, and maybe I'm looking back on that too much, but where the future needs to be as our city continues to grow. Another thing that happens downtown, the higher we go, the longer it takes to get from the front door to the top floor. So when we're going to start seeing longer response times to patient contact when we build more buildings in the air, because that's where our calls are happening downtown. So we're doing what we can to, we bought smaller fire trucks that are a little bit shorter wheelbase and a little bit better turning radius. We're getting a tiller so that we can navigate the downtown streets to get to those locations. So it's changing, as we speak. Who would have ever thought we were even discussed community paramedics, but here we are. I agree with you in that that is, longer than it is in the city, but that's just distance. That's just time on the road. The going through into a gated community, navigating, curvy streets with, street calming, and all those things are factors that take us that time. You know, dispatch does an absolutely perfect job with their call handling time. Can we save some time on the turnout time? Absolutely, and we will make a point of discussing that with the battalion chiefs and the crews out there. So we're gonna do everything we can to shave off that time, but the fact remains that, you know, there is time and distance between the firefighters and the people that live out in that community.
And no doubt, we've come a long way. I mean, we really have. I mean, there was nothing out there several years ago, and we do have good coverage out there, you know, compared to where we were. And I don't think anyone's going to argue that. I just would like to just make sure that we have as good a coverage out there as we have everywhere in the city. And we're the city of West Palm Beach. We should be able to handle our own, and we should have good coverage. And Mayor, I don't know if we ever allow public comment during work session, but I know that Mr. Faso has indicated that he would like to say something.
I understand that, but we don't allow public comment during work session.
I figured I'd
You know
just
that.
ask.
All right, Commissioner Fox.
Thank you. I just had one question about the agency calls and what the dynamic is like. For example, I think you mentioned that Station 8 only has a lieutenant in charge. So I was wondering if, let's say we're going to a car accident or a fire where we have to have an agency come in, who is in charge of those situations? I mean, are we in charge because it is a West Palm Beach incident and we've called in someone, or someone else?
Sure, I can explain that. It kind of depends on the situation. So for example, if we go to a motor vehicle accident that is just a basic motor vehicle accident where, you know, we're not having to remove the doors or the roof off of the car, and it's just a fire truck and a rescue. So it's typically the first arriving unit, that officer assumes control of the scene. If we then start to get more units coming in for something extensive, such as a fire, you get someone of a higher rank that's in charge. So it's either the captain or a battalion chief that runs the incident. So when I mentioned that, I was mentioning as an incremental step towards a goal. You know, that's something that, you know, putting a higher level of authority out there is something that is, you know, part of what Ms. Johnson was talking about, the strategic planning. That could be something that we look at when we look at the big picture on how do we get to where everyone is comfortable with what we do. And I think without, you know, that's just one little piece of the puzzle that would get us to a fully staffed Fire Station 8, one little thing at a time.
Commissioner Lambert.
Thank you. You know, throughout the years, I've heard many different times each of us prioritize public health and public safety within our city, and seeing these response times is alarming, and knowing that we're a city that does have the resources to be able to overcome these situations. You know, I look forward to the financial analysis and report that you're going to give us, and I just wanted to clarify when we would be able to review that. I know it's been discussed at a forthcoming strategic plan session. Is that in the next few months? Is that the plan?
Yes. As we talked about strategic planning during the prior work sessions, we have teed it up for the fall, and I believe the mayor is looking at a November date. And once we finalize, you know, dates, then we would back into, you know, all of the information that we need and getting it out in advance of that session and structuring that session and, you know, just planning it all out. But I believe the mayor is looking at a November strategic planning
We talked
date.
about, yes.
Thank you.
Chief, talk to me. It looks like, as I look at this particular slide, the 2-minute differential seems to be related to travel time. Is that because of where the station is located versus the service area that it has to get to? How is it travel time? Walk us through what that entails.
Let me go to something with a map. So when you're looking at the zone map, for some of this, it's a straight shot out North Lake Boulevard, and you can go 55 or 60 miles an hour to the incident and get there and plenty of time. When you're navigating a gated community or two, when you're going out to past Hamlin, and some of these are dead ends with canals, and there's only one way to get there because you have to go around a canal. You're in a residential area. You can't go as fast. Like my trucks in Northwood, when they're going through, 37th Street, they can't go as fast on that road as they can on Broadway. So it's all about the dynamics of the neighborhood and what the pathways are to get to that home. For some of these homes in the back of Ibis, there's only one way to get there, and you have to go through the entirety of Ibis to get there. With the south end, if we take Dixie Highway, we're at least 40 miles an hour straight shot, and we don't have to stop at a gate. Although they do an excellent job of getting us in the gate, don't misinterpret what I'm saying. There's other agencies that have to fight unmanned gates where they have to get out and open the gate themselves. We're fortunate in the city that we have a lot of gates that we can either punch a code into or we can turn with a key and it opens. We don't have to go get keys out of a box. So we do have our fire prevention department does a great job with that. But in dealing with that, we do have a distance from the fire station. That is just plain and simple. I don't know the mileage exactly to the very last home within there, but just geographically, it's far more. There's a greater distance between where, let's say, for example, Rescue 1 running a call at 15th and Dixie has to go to versus where these calls are occurring in the distance from the fire station.
So that number, the travel time, wouldn't change if we have more personnel in the station. That number is going to, whatever these difficulties, intricacies there may be with respect to travel time is going to be there no matter how many people you have on the truck.
That's built in just because of the geography of the area.
Okay, any other questions, comments? Sal, I apologize, but we really, if I start letting certain people speak, then every work session we're going to have people who want to speak, so I can't make that exception. Anything else on this item? Okay, Chief, thank you. We'll continue to address this, certainly with our strategic planning as we go forward.
Thank you.